be a student on plastering school, you're obviously going to need basic tools. Also, we're going to want to have to practice against some kind of wall. I've put some breeze blocks up here today, and we're going to be knocking up a render shortly, which is a lime and mortar mix. Now, disclaimer here, lime is very dangerous. It gets in your eyes, it will burn your eyes, and people's skin can be sensitive to lime. It is used a lot for bricklaying and on sites and for lime render, but you have to be careful. I would suggest, in fact I would insist, that you wear goggles when you're knocking this stuff up, because if you splash it in your eyes, it's not going to be good. That said and out of the way, I'd say it's used a lot, and we're going to be using that today to knock up this mix. Now, no cement goes into this mix, it's just a building sand. I like to throw in a little bit of sharp as well, and the lime and some plasticizer to help make it a bit more creamy. This stuff, once you've mixed it up, will stay pliable, so you can practice with it all day long. If it gets a teeny bit dry, you can just add a teeny bit of water to that, give it a stir up, and you're good to go again. Other benefits of it are, you can put it on your wall, you can practice with it, but we're also going to cover that today. Once the stuff is dry, you can knock it back off, and it comes away quite easily because it's not set solid, because there's no cement in it. You can knock it back off whatever wall you're practicing on and be able to use that same wall or surface again to continue your practice. Today we're going to do a scratch coat in this stuff and basically learn the technique of the hook and trowel in the same way as any professional plasterer would use it. The obvious basic tools you're going to need are your hook and your trowel, a bucket to mix your gear up in. Here we've also got a water spray. You can pick these up, they're basically gardening water sprays. This is quite a large one. You can pick up a smaller one that you just pump the top of it and it's got a small trigger on it. We've got some plasticizer here, that's particularly for putting into our mix today. Here we've got an electric whisk. Now this is the type you could get from a hire shop. They're very good quality, they last for years. I've had this one for a long time. You can buy cheaper ones, and obviously when you're starting out you can more or less stick a paddle like this one, a little bit smaller, onto a fairly decent drill for knocking up your stuff. Today, as I said, we're going to be using the lime mortar mix, which is this one, and we're going to be mixing it with some soft building sand and a little bit of sharp sand. Here on the tool department as well, we've got a hammer, always handy, tape measure, some tin snips, a knife, a bucket scoop, basically for scooping stuff out of the bucket so you can get right down into the corners, and a brush for washing off your tools. As I've mentioned in other videos, you need to keep your tools clean. You need to wash them off before the stuff sets, because you don't want to be scraping plaster off of your tools, because you can ruin them that way. We also have a small bucket here for water, and we'll be adding the plasticizer to the water before we do a mix. If you're knocking up a whole bag of cement, you would normally put probably about a pint, you can measure that into a pint milk bowl of plasticizer in with that mix, and that would be, if it's a 3-to-1 mix, that will be a large kind of, if you're using a cement mixer, that would be a full load. It would take about that much plasticizer in it to make it more pliable. Today we're only going to be knocking up a small amount in this bucket. Again, this bucket, that's quite a big bucket, but you can pick these up for about a tenner in different hardware stores, so that's not a problem. Today we're going to be knocking up this render, and we're going to be putting it onto these breeze blocks here. I'm going to do a scratch coat on there, and then I'm going to show you how, when that is dry, it can just be easily knocked off and you can just start the process again. Also, I'm going to show you how to fit a render bead today as well, and how we would stick that on. So we'll be putting a scratch coat on first, then we'll be cutting some angle bead and fixing that to the blocks. One other thing you need to be wary of is I tend to put the water into the bucket first when you're mixing in this fashion. You don't need too much water for a mix. It's not like mixing up a bag of plaster where you have to put a few buckets of water into the larger bucket. You just put a small amount in first. I tend to then put the lime in there so that dissolves into the water, and then very carefully add the sand and get a mix to quite a creamy consistency that you'll see as the video carries on. Now, without further ado, let's get cracking. Okay, I've got about half a bucket of water here. I've got my plasticizer. We'll just add a few good glugs to this. I mean, because it's for practicing, you can't really overdo plasticizer, in my opinion anyway. Okay, I'll give that a little stir up. Now, this is when I would add say half of that, half a bucket of water into the tub, into the big tub. To start with, we'll probably add a bit more to that at some point. While that's in there, and it won't hurt, you can wet your hook and your trowel so they're not too dry and they're ready to go once your mix is knocked up. Okay, so here we've got our lime. Now, as I said, with this you need to be very careful. It's caustic against the skin and it will burn your eyes if it goes in your eyes, so I would recommend that you wear goggles when you're doing this. Okay. Right, I'm going to do about a 5-to-1 knock up on this, which will mean for every 5 scoops, or if it was on a larger scale, 5 shovels of sand, it would be 1 shovel of lime. Okay, so it's 5-to-1. 1 lime, 5 sand. Today, I'm going to use building sand. This is basically a soft sand. It's used for bricklaying mostly. Okay. Slice that open with your Stanley knife. And as I said, we'll put 1 lime in there first. Again, don't splash it in there. And then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sand. Now, as I said, I quite like to put some sharp sand in with this as well, but for today, we're just to keep it simple, we're just going to stick with the soft sand and the lime. Okay, again, carefully put your whisk in there and give that a bit of a stir. Okay. And I'll put in another 2 lime and then 10 sand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. See how we're doing. little bit stodgy, which is absolutely fine. Carefully close up your bag of lime if you've got it open somewhere. And then just add a very small drop at a time. Give this another little whisk. Well, now when you're mixing this up, it's quite a yellow kind of consistency. Don't expect it to be any kind of grey colour because it's not obviously not got any cement in it. Now if you have a bricklayer with this stuff, you need to keep it fairly stodgy. But for plastering, it's got to be runnier than it would be for a plastering mix. If you get your hulk, and your bucket scoop, put a bit on there. Again, don't splash it on there, you don't want to be splashing this into your eyes if you don't have to. Now, don't know if you can see the texture of this. Expect you to be able to turn it over like that straight away, but this is the kind of consistency that we're looking for our practice render. Now, as I say, this will stay wet like this all day long, so you've got plenty of opportunity to practice your hook and trowel technique and just spreading onto your wall technique, which we're going to do next. Now, if you're working on a building site, you'd have a spot board and stand, and the gear in the bucket would be poured onto that board, and then you would scoop the stuff off of that, off the edge of the board and onto your hook. But for most domestic and small jobs, a lot of plasterers, including myself, work straight from the bucket, which obviously we're going to be doing today. Now, it's this technique you want to get the hang of when you're practicing. There's no reason, I say this stuff stays wet all day. You've got plenty of time to mess around with it. It's not going to start setting or going off on you like bonding or any other kind of finish would. So, get a blob onto your board like we've got here. Again, probably initially not too much, so we'll add in more to that. Now, again, I said with the technique, what people tend to try and do from a DIY perspective is they kind of put their hook in here and try and kind of lift some up like this, which isn't a great technique for anybody to do, and then go to practice their spreading on the brickwork. Now, the way you cut plaster off of a hook is you take the top of it off. You don't get a bit here, because you try to chop it there and you tip this board up. As you move this up, this bit will probably just plop off. So, initially, for practicing, you need to touch your trowel down to your hook, and then slowly, as you tip the hook up, go up with the trowel. If you just put a small amount on this hook, so you can get the whole lot on the trowel in one go, then this is the best way to start practicing. If you've got too much on here and you try taking the lot off, it's going to splash everywhere. So again, this is the technique you want to practice first. Taking it off the board, dropping it back down, Never drop it that way, because that will tend to splatter a lot more, especially with real plaster, than taking it off and then you tip the trowel so it drops off the heel. Like that, so it drops off the heel, you don't get the splashing. Okay, so the patches up, drop it down, drop it down. When I was learning this technique, the guy that taught me at college said, if a week passes by and you can't do this and you're still dropping it on the floor, then yeah, don't bother becoming a plasterer. Anyway, but for most people, you don't need that much dexterity to soon get the hang of getting the stuff off. And initially you can start with just putting enough on your hulk that you can take off to put onto the wall. When you start to get better at it, again, practice it with a small amount. I'm going to add a little bit more to this for this demo. As you're pushing again, and you're trying, the technique is to try and push the top off. You're cutting the top off. Okay, you're not trying to get this kind of thing that people generally will initially try to do. Okay, it's not great. Practice. So your hulk is pointing upwards at the side like that. You've got it resting. You lift it up and off. Up and off. And drop it back down off the heel. Then, I mean, it's best to probably do this over a board or over your bucket, is to just keep practicing. Eventually you'll do this no problem, and this is how the plasterer gets his stuff from the hulk to be able to transfer it across to his wall. So give that a good go before you start trying to get stuff onto the wall. Get a feel for it, especially different thicknesses of stuff. You have to be more careful with when it's more runny. When it's thicker, it more or less will stay on the hulk anyway when you tip it up, which is good, which is why this is great for practicing. Okay, next we're going to put some onto the wall surface. Now, trowel technique when it comes to putting stuff onto your actual surface is initially when you're practicing, you start, you've got your gear on here, you put it up, touch that part of the trowel against the wall, tip the trowel, you apply a certain amount of pressure and this will get better with practice, and then you lift upwards. As you're coming up, you allow the trowel to slightly come away from the bottom as you just push the gear onto the wall. So you're not scraping it on. If you've not got this too flat, you're basically going up at this angle, yep, to spread onto the wall. Okay, so you've got your gear. Again, if you can be close to the wall when you're practicing this, less chance of dropping it. You cut some off. If you hold your hulk underneath at this stage, then any it does drop off or just plop straight back onto your hulk. So you're in, push quite firmly, and up. Again, going to the other side of it there. Quite firmly. Watch carefully the angle the trowel is going on it. Initially is all your best to, right, so if you see you've got this across here. Now look, once you've got some higher up, as I say, you might not do this with finish, but you do it with bonding and render coats, is then this second one, when you go underneath, as you lift up, the stuff catches onto what's above it, so you get quite a nice smooth connection from one to the other. Again, keep your hulk underneath, anything that drops you can catch. Next to that one, apply the pressure, keep your trowel at an angle, bring it up. So you're working basically from the top downwards, and you're locking your next bit of gear onto the previous bit as you're going upwards. Show you some more of that. Okay, so put your stuff on board. Maybe give it a quick turn over. Underneath, catches onto the stuff above. Upwards. When you start getting the hang of that, what you can then practice, get a bit of stuff on your trowel. It's coming from the side to fill out any gaps that are missing. Okay. That takes us right up to the edge of the blocks. So we've got a gap down this side. Again, these are the trowel techniques you need to practice. And that's why this stuff is so perfect for doing this. Okay. Now you can, if you want to, just gently smooth that surface off. If you assume this was a bigger piece of wall, you'd be going across, but when you practice, this is the only kind of size initially that you really need to work on. Okay, one tool that I didn't mention earlier is scratcher. Now, when you're doing rendering, and this is mostly for outside, you always put on a base coat. If you're doing a smooth render, or if you're doing pebble dash, especially if you're doing pebble dash, the first coat has got to go on. For pebble dashing, that first coat needs to be absolutely full of waterproofer, so that when it goes off, if you chucked water onto it, the water would just run off of it. Because when you go to put your second coat on, that you'd be throwing your stones onto for pebble dashing, they will stick, because the second coat you put on stays wet because of the waterproofer in the first coat that's been left overnight. If you did one coat like this and then without waterproofer in it, came back the next day, you put the second coat on, before you could even pick up some stones to throw on it, the second coat would be starting to dry, and 90% of your stones, when you throw them at that, will just bounce and drop off, and you'll just have odd stones stuck in it. That's the problem that most people come up against when they try even patching up a little bit of pebble dashing. Anyway, back to the scratcher. First coat, there's some debate on what kind of pattern you put on this, but the pattern I've always used, and I've never had any problems, just put your scratcher on, give it a curve. Simple as that. And then you would leave that generally to the next day, especially if you're going to be doing a coat on the top of that that needs to stay wet. If you were doing a very small area and it was going to be a smooth rubbed up render, once this has picked up a bit, you can put your second coat on, because the two of them will dry quite quickly together, and then it can start to be rubbed up either with a sponge or with a sponge float or with a hard float to give you your finish. Another good thing, when you start to practice with real plaster, be it bonding, backing plaster, or your smooth multi-finish that goes on the top, if you put this on your practice wall first and you let that dry, it doesn't have to dry overnight, just let it dry, it doesn't have to have waterproofer in it. Put this on, then knock up your bonding that you want to practice with, or your finish, and then that you put over the top of this. Once the whole thing's gone off and you've got it how you want it and it's beautiful, you can basically hack at it and it will drop back off and again give you your wall back for practicing again. If you just start putting bonding and proper plaster onto the blocks, you'll never get it off once it's dried, and so you have to start on another piece of wall somewhere. So any wall you're going to practice on, initially stay with this. Over the top of this, again, just use your practice plaster before you get on to using bonding or finish, and then you would do your second coat over the top of this. Again, how you put this on and the skill of it basically comes from practicing. The more you do this, I mean, if you stuck at this just for a good day, practicing your trowel technique, putting this on, I mean, at this stage, rather than waiting for it to dry, like if you were doing a bigger area, you could literally just scrape this back off and start again. But if you practice for the day, by the end of the day, well, you'd be looking like a bit of a pro with your trowel technique. So, as I say, practice makes perfect. If you've got any questions you want to ask me, if you put them in the comments down below, and we can tackle them as and when. Now, for doing the side of something like this, because we're going to have a corner here on our wall, it's obviously a slightly more difficult technique, but again, you need to practice this with your practice plaster to get the hang of it. You don't want to be messing about trying to learn this with bonding plaster or something that's giving you about 20-30 minutes before it starts going hard in the bucket, and just costing you money, and you're just making a mess. So again, with the hook and trowel, this time I say the stuff's quite thick. I'm taking a little bit up off of that, placing it against the side of the block and going down. Or again, if you get some on the heel, which is the bottom of your trowel, that way. Again, if we started at the top, we can put the other one underneath. If you keep your hook underneath again, you can catch anything that might drop. You push upwards so it locks on to the bit above. So you're getting your plaster, put your hook underneath to catch any rubbish that drops, underneath, scoop upwards. Again, you can't over practice this, and eventually you more or less be able to do it with your eyes shut. Okay. Put a little bit more on there. Okay, we've got that area covered. Now, what I then do is put just a gentle scratch on the side of that, and this is good to go. Right, now, corners need corner beads, angle beads. You get plasterboard beads, which are this type. They're very thin, so only about 1 inch across this way. And generally these are fixed onto plasterboard walls. If this was plasterboard and a plasterboard corner, these could be fixed to that. Now these can be screwed on, and if the plasterboard's lovely and straight and plumb, then that's absolutely fine. If it's not straight and plumb, then what I tend to do is I'll put the plaster onto the surface I'm going to do, or onto the corner, and I will squash the bead into the plaster and level it up. But anyway, this is render. So this is a render bead. You see it's bigger, it's got a bigger mesh on it, and that is going to be fixed onto our corner, and so that when that's set, And when we then plaster up both sides of that, we get a nice corner to our new work. Again, obviously you just measure the height or the length you need of the render bead. Get your tape measure, measure that up against your bead. Get hold of your tin snips, and then you would cut up to where your measurement is. Now the technique is if you cut up one side, turn the bead, cut up the other side, and the bead will bend backwards there. If you just move that back and forth, that'll snap off. What you generally tend to do then, in case you're going to come up against any other beads coming in the opposite direction, so you've got a mitre there, is to mitre this, so you literally, it only has to be rough, take those corners off. You got that? Okay. Then, assuming we're going to be putting our bead on here, we'll get some more gear. And basically, we need to squeeze some just onto the corner. Then you take your bead, you can squash it together slightly because it might not really be, might be out of square, a little bit too wide. You then place your bead onto that corner, and then using your spirit level, but for this small section we're not going to be doing that, you bend it by tapping it into your mix, onto your wall there. So then basically, once that is dry, or in this case while you're practicing, it doesn't need to be dry, you can, again, more stuff, you're practicing your technique, you go up and against the bead. Again, going from, if you start high up, then the other plaster can be from below. And that bead gives us a nice smooth edge. Again on the side, like we did with the scratch coat. Get some on the heel of your trowel. Get the top bit on first. Again, try and hold your fork underneath if you can to catch anything that drops. And basically it's the same technique again, but of course you're going up against the edge of a nice board there now to give you a nice corner. If you had a bead on the other corner, you'd fill this front bit in, and then you can just run straight edge up the top of that to give you a nice flat front to your work. But basically that's how we fit render beads onto block work or brickwork. So guys, if you're going to be a student at Plastering School, this is the way to go. I wouldn't suggest you just try and plaster a big plasterboard wall if you've not attempted it before. Go this way, get the technique right. As I say, this stuff stays wet all day, If it gets a little bit dry, just add a bit more water to it. Get practicing. Let me know how you get on in the comments below. I look forward to talking to you. Thanks for coming, thanks for subscribing, thanks for watching Plastering School, and I'll see you soon.